August 27th, 1933, East Prussia. Adolf Hitler and Hermann Goering, both veterans of World War I, paid tribute to Field Marshal von Hindenburg in the awe-inspiring setting of the monument to the Battle of Tannenberg. Hitler declares, "Tannenberg is a symbol. It was here, in 1914, that Germany's destiny was determined." For Hindenburg, 20 years earlier, the Battle of Tannenberg had been the defining event of his life and of the First World War. Millions of men are caught in the machinery of a war that will be short and glorious, or so the generals and heads of state promise. Instead, the war becomes one of deadlock and fear. Fear on the home front. As the Germans advance on Paris, there's a run on the banks to empty personal accounts. Many flee, storming train stations. But the Ferrari family remains home in L'Étang-la-Ville, near Paris. The first images of daily life in the war's early weeks. The grandfather gives a military salute. He is confident in the French army. The children prepare for the new school year. A directive from the French Ministry of Education, dated August 7th, 1914, states, "Lessons must cover the causes of the war, the unwarranted aggression that provoked it, and how France, eternal champion of progress and law, was forced to again rise up with its valiant allies to repel a barbarian attack." Thousands of refugees from Belgium, northern France, and the Champagne region flee the advancing Germans. The war forces families from their homes, from their lives. The same panic strikes East Prussia in northern Germany, where the Russians have attacked. Rumors spread. They plunder and rape. In movie theaters, German propaganda features a villain, the Russian rapist, in film after film, terrorizing audiences. But the Russian advance is orderly. The generals execute their strategic plan, opening a new front which eases the pressure on their French ally. The Russian steamroller, as it is called, made up of two imperial armies totaling 400,000 men, threatens Berlin. Russian soldiers, oppressed by Tsarism and religion, sing farewell to their country. But the Russian soldiers do not understand why they must march hundreds of miles and cross the border to defend their homeland. Peasants for the most part. Many can neither read nor write, and have left no journals or letters. In his novel August 1914, the famous Russian writer Solzhenitsyn describes the buoyant mood. The regiment is a sort of village, the officer a sort of squire, and so long as meals, mass, and vodka are offered, bullets hold no terror for them. On August 20th, 1914, the Russian army advances through East Prussia, seemingly invincible. Along with thousands of civilians, the German 8th Army retreats. General von Hindenburg, 67, takes over command. To reassure the public, the general is filmed in conversation with Kaiser Wilhelm II. Hindenburg is seconded by General Ludendorff, 47, who has earned praise for the Belgian campaign. Hindenburg and Ludendorff appear unconcerned. They make a formidable team. As Hindenburg puts it, it is a happy marriage. Hindenburg and Ludendorff know they are outnumbered. They have only 200,000 men under their command, half as many as the Russians. But they are better armed and can move their troops more efficiently through strategic rail transport. Morale among the troops is high. Many of them come from East Prussia. They are defending their homeland. Ludendorff deploys the dirigibles of Count Zeppelin, huge hydrogen-filled airships that enable him to observe enemy movements. The Germans are able to transmit vital information. The two Russian armies are too far apart to come to each other's aid. The time is right for a German attack, starting with General Samsonov's army, which is nearing Tannenberg. The Germans take 90,000 prisoners. 30,000 Russians are killed or wounded. General Samsonov tells his officers, "The Tsar trusted me. How can I face him after such a disaster?" And he puts a bullet through his head. The Second Russian Army is decimated in turn. The defeat is a terrible blow to Russia's French and British allies, who seek to cover it up. German refugees from East Prussia return to their villages, but rarely their homes. Their fate has shaken the nation's morale. To boost spirits, the Germans film the surviving troops, who receive triple rations. 10,000 of their fellow comrades have fallen in battle. Hindenburg is named Field Marshal. He becomes a national hero. Ludendorff, the real architect of the victory, is overlooked. But Hindenburg says, "If things had turned out differently, mine would be the most hated name in all Germany." At Russian headquarters, Tsar Nicholas II, in his special train, sitting camouflaged in a birch forest, meets his uncle, the commander-in-chief of his armies, Grand Duke Nicholas. An authoritarian giant, he plays down the disaster at Tannenberg. For him, the real enemy is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He says, "The war started in Austria. The way to Berlin lies through Austria-Hungary." The Russians are able to conquer Galicia. at the time an Austrian province, and its main city, Lemberg. The Cossack cavalry advances 120 miles. Austria loses 400,000 men, killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. The POWs are a cross-section of the Slavic peoples of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, including Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, and Bosnians. A Russian propaganda film shows an Austro-Hungarian prisoner fraternizing with a Russian soldier, two Slavs in opposing uniforms. They are filmed as symbols of Russia's desire to unite all Slavs in its empire. Nicholas II's smile of satisfaction after this initial victory against the Austrians masks the loss of 200,000 Russian soldiers in 3 weeks of war. To the west, on a front 370 miles long, 7 German armies, 2 million men in all, invade France. The First Army of General von Kluck crosses the Somme River, the last natural line of defense before the capital. The German officers rally their troops, saying, "Victory is close. The triumphant entry into Paris awaits you." The German infantrymen have marched 250 miles since the heavy fighting in Belgium of early August 1914. The commander of the Brandenburg Regiment tells them, "We must allow the enemy no rest. Sweat saves blood." Even as they retreat, the French continue the fight. They are at the limits of their endurance. The heat is unbearable. It is the hottest summer of the century. Few men have washed or taken off their boots for a month. Blood oozes from the backs of the horses that are seldom unsaddled. But it is an orderly retreat by the French and British. The 1st Battalion of the Gloucestershire Regiment, which arrived in France on August 13th, has marched 185 miles before assembling to hear the Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force, Field Marshal Sir John French, tell them that the situation is grave. All of France says its prayers. Every side invokes God's name. May God protect France. Will France's colonial troops save the country? Ever since they landed in the south of France, the African troops have been marching northward. Many prefer to go barefoot, rather than wear their heavy army boots. Before their arrival, a French senator says with concern, neither the climate nor the food of France is suited to them. A general reassures him they are disciplined, strong, and devoted to their leaders. One of these Senegalese infantrymen is carrying his captain's deck chair. All around Paris, the defense forces organize, using any and every means. But on September 2nd, 1914, 2 French aviators returned from a reconnaissance flight over enemy lines. The German forces are changing direction. Rather than carry on to Paris, the German armies swerve in an attempt to encircle the French army, thus opening themselves to an attack by the French and British along the Marne River. The commander of the forces defending Paris, General Gallieni, orders the swift transport of 6,000 men to the Marne in Parisian taxicabs. A huge propaganda operation, which the government has filmed to boost French morale. The Marne River taxis are hailed as the saviors of Paris, though their contribution to the battle is minimal. They carry only a fraction of the million Frenchmen preparing for battle. The French commander-in-chief is General Joffre, age 62. On September 6, 1914, he has his officers read the day's orders to his soldiers advancing to the front. At the moment when a battle is about to begin, upon which hangs the fate of France, a troop that cannot advance must at any cost hold on to the conquered ground and be killed there rather than retreat. No weakness can be tolerated. The soldiers are afraid. They know that court-martials await those who waver. If they retreat, they will be executed by their own. If they advance, they will be killed by the enemy. Among them is one of France's greatest poets, Charles Péguy. The 41-year-old lieutenant is killed by a bullet to his forehead. A Christian socialist and patriot, he had written these verses. Blessed are those who died in a just war. Blessed the ripe wheat, the wheat gathered in sheaves. Blessed are those who died in great battles, stretched out on the ground in the face of God. French artillery units proved to be extremely effective, thanks to the 75mm cannon, which can fire 20 rounds a minute. Consumes an astronomical number of shells, some 100,000 shells a day, 200 million shells for the entire war. They are manufactured by women who work in miserable conditions. On September 9th, after 3 days of fighting, the French and British are victorious, but only after human carnage on a terrible scale. The French historian Marc Bloch, a sergeant at the time, writes, "A severed leg lies on the ground, almost ridiculous in his horror. A revolting stench turns the stomach." The fighting has left 200,000 dead or wounded on the French side, and just as many Germans. Young women from comfortable families sign up as nurses. Known as angels of mercy, they are wrested from a sheltered adolescence and must learn to endure the terrible screams of mutilated young men and the constant, unbearable odor of blood, ether, and gangrene. The unimaginable number of wounded and dead does not deter military and political leaders. General Joffre, decorating colonial troops, proclaims, "As their cruel but glorious losses testify, the native infantrymen have admirably carried out their duty. Curiously, patriotism among the troops also remains high. Despite the slaughter, they think the war will end soon. Private Pierre Branguier writes to his wife, "I have not given up hope of returning this November. I cannot imagine that the nations involved can keep up their incredible effort much longer." The French have taken 25,000 German prisoners, and like all the belligerents, filmed them as a tangible sign of victory. Troops view their captives with curiosity, mixed with hatred. Henri Desperrières, a 21-year-old soldier from the south of France, says, "It's the first time I see them up close. My cartridges weigh heavy in my pockets. I long to plug a few Prussian bellies with them." Altogether, the POWs are treated rather well on both sides. The International Committee of the Red Cross creates the Prisoners of War Agency. It will deliver 10 billion letters and parcels over the course of the conflict. The French are permitted a brief period of rest. The colonel, the father to his regiment, expresses his concern for the survivors. "How is the stew, soldier?" is the standard phrase. They have saved Paris. But a young cavalry officer, René Chambre, writes, "The Battle of the Marne. We won the battle and lost the victory." The French and the British allow the Germans to flee towards the north of France in a series of outflanking maneuvers known as the Race to the Sea. During those 3 months of battle, other German units complete their conquest of Belgium. The German military seek to win over the local inhabitants. But the plundering and requisitions to feed the soldiers quickly spells starvation for Belgian citizens. Among these German soldiers is an obscure Austrian painter who has enlisted in the German army. Adolf Hitler, then 25 years old, will remain marked by the hell he experienced in Flanders. In his book Mein Kampf, Hitler writes, "The pride of the fighting soon turned into nightmare." For 4 years, the British refused to abandon the area around the Belgian town of Ypres. This small strip of Belgium must remain in Allied hands. That is the wish of the Belgian King Albert I, to whom King George V pays a visit of support. A Belgian military doctor, Major Max Deauville, says, "Holding our position is God's command, even if death awaits us all." Ypres, the last British stronghold in the north. Ypres, which will become the tomb of thousands of Canadians in the Battle of Passchendaele. Fill the ranks, in the south of England, the British train ever more fighting men. Canadians, English and French-speaking, all volunteers, all wearing the same uniform, and all subjects of His Majesty. With his piercing blue eyes, King George V inspects the troops. They are the same age as his oldest son, who is serving in the Royal Navy. This worries the King and Queen Mary, seen here smiling bravely for the occasion. After disembarking in the ports of France, the Canadians marched to the front. Are they ready to wage war? Claudius Corneloup, a private from Quebec, writes, "Our soldiers anticipate long hardship without questioning, without even grasping that on each face they will witness pain and anguish. They will suddenly be transported into the darkness of great calamity." In October, the Germans, determined to hold on to the regions they have conquered, begin to dig, or force civilians to dig for them, a veritable network of fortifications in the oozing clay of Flanders. The heavy soil is waterlogged because the Belgians deliberately opened their dikes to flood the region. The Germans work hard to make these termite colonies livable, but winter will transform them into freezing crypts. Across from them, the British dig in too. They prepare to hold the front in Flanders, which is now at a stalemate. A war of movement is replaced by a war of position. Private Corneloup is not happy. He says, "What's the point of having trained to sprint across fields when what they want is miners?" Farther south, the French make do with more or less interconnected foxholes. The French High Command refuses to condone the troops installing themselves in trenches organized for defense. The soldiers know that their officers think only of attack. The Germans must be driven out of the French provinces they occupy, behind what is now a line of trenches 435 miles long that stretches from the North Sea to the Swiss border. The French observe the enemy trenches by means of devices that sometimes prove perilous for the brave artillery spotters. Of 1914, General Joffre launches vast offensives that are stopped dead by German machine guns. Offensives that are meant to take pressure off the Russian front, but leave 100,000 men dead or wounded. 20,000 die, merely to capture the lonely peak of a forgotten mountain. Already, there are so many widows. Inconsolable at the loss of a 20-year-old husband when one is mother to a 20-month-old child. On All Saints' Day, Pope Benedict XV addresses the world. He says, "This war is the suicide of Europe. There appears no limit to the destruction and carnage. Day after day, fresh blood is spilled on the earth. In view of this senseless crime, I repeat unto you, peace on earth to men of goodwill." Will the Pope's words be heard? There are moments of spontaneous fraternization on the front, as these rare images show. All these men risk being shot for treason. No one knows what became of them, and their celebrations were quickly stifled. The generals remain deaf and blind. The military, already very powerful at the beginning of the war, is starting to dominate politics and politicians. Despite the hundreds of thousands of dead and wounded, the conflict spreads. In Africa, the French, British, and Belgians attack the German colonies of Togo, Cameroon, Tanganyika, Rwanda, and Namibia. Their goal? Enlarge their colonial empires and obtain the raw materials needed for the war industry. Rare images of peoples that had largely been left to themselves and are now conscripted, sometimes under the lash, as here in the German colony of Zanzibar. Many Africans are lured by the soldiers' proud uniform and good pay. These troops will fight with loyalty and courage in the unspeakable conditions that all combatants face. A 100,000 Africans and 30,000 Europeans will lose their lives in Africa, victims of ferocious fighting and diseases such as dysentery, typhoid, and especially malaria. In Asia, to honor its treaty of alliance with Great Britain, Japan has fought the war against Germany from the beginning. The Japanese take the opportunity to help themselves to the German enclave in China, the port of Tsingtao, where there's a German brewery that produces a beer known to this day. Japan, on the rise economically and militarily, demonstrates its superiority by shelling for 7 straight days the German defenses, which collapse. Tsingtao and its beer now in their hands, the Japanese turn their attention to the rest of China. While in Europe the fighting bogs down, the conflict spreads to the Middle East. On November 23, 1914, in Jerusalem, then part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, allied with the Germans, the Musons call for a holy war to rally Muslim combatants against the French, British, and Russians. The Ottoman Empire occupies a strategic position. Its capital, Constantinople, now Istanbul in Turkey, is the home of the Hagia Sophia Basilica, which has been turned into a mosque. Constantinople commands the passage between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. The Ottoman Empire reaches as far as the Persian Gulf and threatens the Suez Canal, a vital artery for the British and a major shipping route for supplies to the Western Front. The Ottoman sovereign is Sultan Mehmed V, 72, here seen receiving the German monarch Kaiser Wilhelm II. Wilhelm II is worried about diplomatic maneuvering by the British, who tried to buy Turkey's allegiance, but the Germans outbid them. The Sultan is a ruler in name only. Real power lies with a nationalist organization, the Young Turks. Its leader, Enver Pasha, 33, is the country's strongman. Educated in Germany, Enver Pasha leads an army of 1 million men, trained and supervised by Germans. The Germans are counting on Enver Pasha's armies to provide relief in the fight against Russia. Enver Pasha decides to attack Russia, Turkey's hereditary enemy, in the Caucasus, the border region inhabited by Muslims. The Ottomans hope these Muslims will rise up against the Tsar if a holy war is declared. Turks, fearsome warriors, have already fought the Russians, who hold the passes and who have deployed their troops in the mountains to draw the enemy toward the summits. During a previous war against the Turks, a Russian general said, "The Caucasus is a fortress, and only a madman would attempt to scale it." Is Enver Pasha mad? On December 22, 1914, in the middle of winter, he launches an attack in the mountains near Sarikamish. The attack fails. Defeated, the 70,000 soldiers of the Turkish Third Army die of the cold or are finished off as they retreat. Not a single Muslim, either in Russia or among its allies, rose up for the Holy War. The party in power, the Young Turks and Enver Pasha, need a scapegoat. They settle on Turkey's Armenian community, who are Christians. The Turkish Interior Minister issues an order for genocide. The government has decided to destroy all the Armenians living in Turkey. No regard must be paid to either age or sex. No allowances will be made. The Turks hang the intellectuals and community leaders and appropriate their possessions. Their wives and daughters are raped, then murdered. The Armenians who survived the first massacres are herded by the Turks to camps in the Syrian desert, hundreds of miles away. Exhausted, beaten, denied food and water, they die along the way. Over 1 million Armenians are killed. For the Turks, the war goes on. March 15, 1915, a joint British and French fleet tries to force the Dardanelles Strait to take Constantinople and prevent Bulgaria from entering the war alongside the German and Ottoman empires. The Turks have powerful cannons and underwater minefields. They sink 3 battleships and damage 7 others. Out of a fleet of 18, 10 British and French warships are out of action. After the defeat, Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty and mastermind of the mission, is forced to step down. But those responsible for the disaster are the admirals and generals. In their continued contempt and underestimation of the Turks, 1 month later, they venture a landing on the coast of Turkey at Gallipoli to seize the enemy batteries. On April 25, 1915, the Anzacs, the Australian and New Zealand forces, together with British and French contingents, are dropped on the narrow beaches. From high on the steep slopes, the Turks fire on them with impunity. The Turks are well armed, well equipped, and well commanded by officers such as Mustapha Kemal, the future leader and modernizer of Turkey. Pinned down, the Allied troops endure months of agony. Ellis Ashmead Bartlett, the British war correspondent for the London Daily Telegraph, writes, "It is the most ghastly military fiasco in our history. The generals had no maps and a vague idea of the nature of the ground in their front, and no adequate steps were taken to keep the troops supplied. The Australian volunteers have nothing to drink under a beating sun." Three months later, using his own camera, Ashmead Bartlett films these same men, now starving and feverish. They know that 150,000 men have been killed or wounded here in vain. Bulgaria has swung over to the German side. The Dardanelles remain in Turkish hands. The Daily Telegraph's correspondent directly addresses Herbert Asquith, the British Prime Minister, causing a scandal. "Mr. Prime Minister, I am not sure you are aware of the true state of affairs out here or to what extent the generals keep you informed. Here in Gallipoli, we are dissipating a large portion of the empire's fortune and have not yet gained a single acre of ground of any strategic value. This futile expedition may ruin our prospects of wearing down Germany's colossal military power." Germany's power, embodied by the victor of East Prussia, Marshal von Hindenburg, nonetheless has its limits. The toll of German dead and wounded is turning public opinion against the war. In April, in The Hague in the Netherlands, which remains neutral, the Women's Congress for Peace demands an immediate end to hostilities. But just the opposite happens. The conflict expands again. Italy enters the war on May 23, 1915. A neutral power in the early months of the war, it was, nonetheless, allied with Germany. Britain and France promised to return to Italy the cities of Trento and Trieste, which are still in Austrian territory. Italy changes sides. patriotic, anti-Austrian fervor sweeps Italy, fed by the grandiloquent verses of the nationalist poet Gabriele D'Annunzio. You are the raging sparks of the sacred blaze. May all voices be a single flaming cry, Italia, Italia. These young Italians have no idea of the hardships ahead as they march into the Alpine War. In France, the front is deadlocked in the trenches, though punctuated by attacks as deadly as they are futile. Private Charles Gaillard writes, "Here, morale is very poor. We're fed up with fighting but not advancing, and the peasants envy their cows, which are bedded more comfortably than they are." The enemy is on the other side of a sea of barbed wire, which stretches to infinity. Given the impasse, the Germans decide to strike a major blow in the east, in the part of Poland still under Russian rule. Certain of his success, the new German commander-in-chief, General von Falkenhayn, authorizes 33-year-old American journalist Wilbur Durborough and his crew to follow the German army for 6 months. They travel in an American luxury convertible, a Stutz, led by a German military guide. Durborough is clearly proud of his scoop. In the United States, which is still officially neutral, hostility toward Germany surges after a German submarine torpedoes and sinks the British liner SS Lusitania on May 7, 1915, killing 1,500, including 120 Americans. The Germans claim the attack is justified because the Lusitania was transporting ammunition. Proof of this emerges only years later. But the darkening mood at home does not stop Durborough from enjoying his travels with these German officers. He presents an affectionate portrait of the Kaiser's troops relaxing before the attack. After the German victory in Poland, Durborough films thousands of Russian prisoners. And in this shot of a captured Russian field kitchen, he shows Germans who seem to like Russian food. Durborough films himself on the platform at the Warsaw train station, alongside German soldiers celebrating the city's capture. Then, accompanied by a police contingent armed with whips, he films the Jews in the Jewish quarter. And the German army's victory march into Warsaw on August 4th, 1915. Other war cameramen also capture images of Germany's might as Zeppelins bomb London. The British realize that the heart of their empire is now vulnerable. A new kind of warfare is born, industrial warfare, a war of destruction, of annihilation. The aim now is to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. assembly lines turn out a flood of even deadlier inventions. Grenades of all kinds, bombshells of every caliber, a variety of poison gases, a proud achievement of scientific research. How will mankind endure this voyage to the heart of darkness, to the farthest reaches of hell?